Mike, what's up, man? Great to see you again and have you back on the podcast.
Ryan, thanks for having me on. Thing.
It sounds like you were saying you've just been doing the marathon podcasting circuit at this point.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. When you do a book, it's you want to attempt to get out to every broader audience that you can get into. So yeah, it's the marathon, but I can't complain, and I'm just trying to be like Jack Carr. That's what I'm trying to be.
We're all trying to be like Jack Carr.
Yeah, I
So
know.
welcome to the club. I saw that he did the forward for you, and you couldn't ask for a better guy. I actually met Jack years ago, and you know how I knew he was a good guy is I went and did a podcast at his place, and he said, "Hey, before you leave, I got something for you." I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "Here's some elk from the elk that my daughter and I shot." I'm like, "I like
Oh
you,
yeah,
man. I like you
that's the best gift you can give, dude.
for sure." Well, last year I got a moose, and I was thinking, you know what? Next time I go visit Jack, I gotta return the favor and bring him some moose meat.
Oh, that'll be good, man. You've done his podcast in here in Park City.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah, it's such a good podcast. But dude, I mean, Moose is in his backyard,
I know.
but he
Isn't that
can't.
wild?
It's crazy. It's just, there's animals everywhere. But I want a bag of moose too. When you say moose, like my lips start to
Oh, wait, are you
quiver.
in? Are you in Park City too?
I'm I could almost see his house from my house,
Okay,
and
all right.
I'm in Heber City, like kind of right
Yes.
down the hill. Yeah, but right down the road,
Okay, we'll bring you some moose too, man. We'll get you hooked up as
dude. I
well.
love it. Moose is my favorite too.
That's interesting because I think it leads into the conversation. I've got a couple freezers worth of meat over here, and I think it leads into the conversation specifically as it relates to being prepared. And I think naturally we lean more towards situational awareness, towards maybe firearms training or some sort of self defense. But I think one area that gets often overlooked is making sure that you have food storage, home fortification, some of those things that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, we break it down into what's called homestead, which are the tangible elements of preparedness. Like you said, a lot of people weigh in favor of things that are cool. Like you don't go to the
Right.
gym working legs, right? You do chest and tries because it's cool, it's visually appealing. But when you look at the needs, desires, they're very different things when it comes to survival. And homestead or having food, water, hygiene, all the things to sustain your survivability is important. And even on the topic of hunting, period, outside of storing your freezer full of meat that you harvested, the journey, the training, all the things in anticipation for the lead up, the shot, that whole process is a magical and beautiful journey. And like Jack Carr did it with his child, that would be something more along the lines that we're trying to teach in preparedness than your EDC pistol.
Well, I think if you get that right, and here's what I'm understanding from you is if you get that component, yeah, I think you talk about it as the resilient mindset. And if you focus on the resilient mindset, what I've noticed is that you're probably going to be more creative. If you get yourself into a situation that you're not completely prepared for, you're going to be able to adapt and improvise a little bit better. And that's why I like that you started it with the mindset because all those other little puzzle pieces can backfill once you have the right mindset.
Yeah, the hard skills are the easy fill in. I think starting with the foundation the right way would be mindset. And for us, resilience is the most important part of mindset. Certainly, there are other attributes that are important, like having a warrior mindset, conflict resolution, the things that you think about often. But being resilient, which is literally being able to get back on your feet after you've been knocked down, is leans on the side of adaptability. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say the number one characteristic in survival period is being able to adapt. So it's very important. And it starts with not like some high speed exposure, no base jumping. It starts with like a conversation with yourself and then exposing yourself to new challenges, which could be the workout of the day, a new hobby, camping and fishing and all these outdoor activities, hunting. So it doesn't have to be outside of your reach or your grasp.
Yeah. What do you think people struggle with when it comes to that mindset? It seems like people generally, probably not as much the circles that you're running in, but generally, I would say general population tends to believe that everything will be okay, that we have first responders that will handle these situations, and then they find themselves wanting or caught off guard. But what are some of the pitfalls and traps that average, ordinary people like me fall into with regards to the mindset?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because it does most certainly translate to civilians or outside of the institution. And
Mm-hmm.
that's for good reason, right? Because the institution forces your hand, like you're voluntold. And when you set and prescribe yourself to a routine, a pattern of life that sets you up for success, you're optimized. But we know like being part of the institution and being dialed because you're optimized for performance or just succeeding when you're on your own, that's the real challenge. Like when you have nobody telling you to do something, that's the real difficulty. And I think self-discipline, that whole Jocko discipline is actually freedom, because when you have the discipline and you create your own criteria, your own habits, you start to develop as a person. And I think a lot of people have a hard time. It's easy to conceptualize, philosophize about your mindset and being a certain way. It's hard to actually do it. So being able to take what you want and then bridge the gap with planning to execute that, I think is the missing component. It's actually the next part of the next parts that we talk about is planning. Because if you don't know how to execute because you're so enthralled with the ability to think through these things, if you don't have the ability to execute and actually do the things, then you're not going to be successful. You can have, that whole mindset is everything is very popular to say out loud, but it's like, how do I get there? And I think that's what we're trying to do is bridge the gap.
Yeah, I think I've thought about that even with regards to this podcast. A lot of the guys listening, and I fall into this trap as well when I listen to other podcasts, we love to spend time pontificating on self help and self development. And if in this situation I would do that, in that situation I would do this. And we actually believe that we're moving the needle when we're consuming information. And so you'll hear guys, especially in like a physical altercation, I hear guys, well, if I was in that situation, I'd kick his ass. It's like, show me that you have the capacity. And I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else in that department. I'm just, if you're going to say that, show me that you have the capacity to handle getting sucker punched in the face and then getting yourself out of that situation. If you don't have any experience in that, why do we believe that we could handle that when that situation arises?
Yeah, that's you and I have identified that. We've talked about it, both you on your podcast and on your social, and me as well, that a lot of the things that we see in social media is a lot of virtue signaling our reality, and often that's virtual. And so there's a big difference between people talking in an echo chamber or a void and the real things that happen. I mean, a lot of people say, well, Mike, I want to be as successful as you. I said, well, there's 10 years of me running this business where I wasn't on social media. When I get off of social media, get off the podcast, get off the YouTube channel, I'm doing all the things that need to run this business and move it forward. So be prepared to work. And I think that, like you said, that's a difficult bridge to get to gap space, because when you have the ability to dream up all the things you want to be, but you don't have the tools necessarily to make that to come to fruition, you need to get help there. And often all the things that you see in consumption of information or even dissemination of information, getting people hyped for the thing doesn't include instructions to actually do the thing, which is why I think part of this book is important.
Yeah. How do you recommend that guys who, they're going to hear this podcast, they probably follow you to some degree, they followed what we've been doing for a while, and they're thinking to themselves, yeah, I would love to be prepared for all of these different scenarios that may happen in life, but how do you prepare yourself for uncertainty, unknown variables that are hard to simulate in, training environments? What do you suggest to a guy like that who is interested?
Yeah, I think the best approach is to use statistical probability. I'm a big fan of stats, right? A lot of people, they carry the EDC in the waistband pistol, but they don't carry the tourniquet. And statistically, the accident, coming across it or being a victim yourself, especially in car accidents where 40,000 people die a year, are much more likely than being in the self-defense gunfight. But, not saying to not have the pistol, but have the tourniquet as well. When you look at statistical probability, the story will also tell you that you need to develop course of actions based on the highest probability determined by your environment. So if you live in Florida, you're not going to practice for earthquakes because that natural disaster is not likely. But if you're in California, you're not going to practice for hurricanes because that's not likely. So if you take your world and you're looking to become more prepared, Take the things that you're likely deficient in because there's a statistical probability of it going wrong, or and you don't have the tools. And that starts with a conversation. What I tell people all the time is course of action development, or conversation is course of action development, and what we called wargaming in the military. That was a deliberate training process that Green Berets do in an ISO facility for a week. I mean, we'll talk through every eventuality, every contingency, every devil advocate play in order to develop and derive a sound plan with backups. So if you're thinking about self-defense, for example, and you say, honey, if somebody came through the door right now, what would you do about it? And most guys' responses be like, yeah, you know what I do about that. I beat
Yeah,
that ass.
exactly.
It's like, I'm the cool guy. It's like, yeah, but what if the guy had a gun? Like, oh, well, I have a gun. It's like, where's your gun? Like,
Where is it?
oh,
Right.
yeah, it's upstairs
It's in the
in the
closet or
nightstand,
whatever.
in the
Yeah.
closet. And so what you're doing in that is you're becoming vulnerable, talking through courses of action and identifying weaknesses. So if you make a list of all the weaknesses and deficiency, this is like life and the self-defense scenario and the fire plan for your house and your family. You start identifying all those deficiencies, and then you work one step at a time at making those liabilities your assets. So I don't have a pistol downstairs anywhere. Maybe I should start with a storm door. Like, hey, is the door locked? Do we have a
Right.
CCTV camera? That redundancy and those weaknesses identified simply happen in course of action development through a conversation. I think that's important. A lot of people don't want to talk about their weaknesses, but when you do that, that's when you could start repairing them. And you talk about it often about routines and habits. That's when you could start making these routines and habits part of your everyday life, fixing liabilities and turning them into assets. Which, again, this is a thing that's like constantly needs work. This is not a pinnacle moment. I'm sitting on a platform. I'm prepared. This is like every single day we got to work at it. Like we got to work at being better men, better husbands, better whatever. This is a constant work ethic. So apply that like you do going to the gym to improve your physical body. Do that with all things preparedness. I think it's a good start point.
I think that's a good way to say it, because a lot of the times when we look at our deficiencies in home preparation, for example, we might look at it and say, holy shit, like I have so much room for improvement, and I've got to pour in tens of thousands of dollars to make sure I have all of this in place, when the first step might just be putting longer screws on the strike plate on your door, right? And it's like, do that today, because that's low hanging fruit. Go get you a Ring camera that's going to cost you, I don't know, $500 to get completely set up with a Ring camera or something like that. And then
Yep.
just start working at it. But I do like that you're talking about vulnerabilities, and you're using it, from my perspective, in the correct way, not the new age way of viewing at it, which is like just be vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable.
Mm.
But you're talking about looking at vulnerabilities and deficiencies for the sole reason of fixing them, getting better,
Yeah.
looking at where you're weak so you can make that a strength.
Yeah. I think incrementally we could all improve. And when you look at vulnerabilities, it doesn't necessarily have to be an emotional obstacle. It could be, hey, these are my technical weaknesses, and I could technically make them strengths. And like you said, like even the screw plates, the longer screws in that take you a couple minutes to fix. What often happens is we get overwhelmed because we realize there are too many deficiencies. There are so many, it's overwhelming to us. So we kind of get paralysis through analysis. What I'm saying is make the list, prioritize what's most important in that list, and start knocking them out one step at a time. And then all of a sudden, you start building confidence in your game. It's the same thing that you do when you look at your like health and nutrition or physical fitness. You go, man, my legs suck. They don't have strength. They don't have agility. Well, then you're going to start one compound exercise at a time, and then culminate with endurance. That's how we're looking at this: incremental small victories, one step at a time.
Yeah. I actually have a real world experience of what you're talking about with looking at your environment and planning for the statistical probability of something going wrong. When we moved to Maine several years ago, we moved to a corner that was a pretty dangerous corner. And I had a lot of people tell me there's a ton of accidents here, ton of accidents, ton of accidents. Like, okay, whatever, that's not really anything outside of some minor fender benders that I've been involved with or have seen. And I remember the first accident, and I went out there. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I don't know what to do. I have no idea what I need to do here. But we probably saw, and I'm not exaggerating on this, I would say over the course of nearly 4 years, we probably saw 30 accidents
Oh,
on that
wow.
corner. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
insane. One of the most dangerous corners in America, actually. And by by the time that we left, we moved back to Utah. But by the time we left, I remember the last accident, and it was a pretty serious accident. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but it was really interesting to watch my family react. We had the medical kit by the front door. We always kept a couple chairs and blankets by the front door because sometimes it was cold, and so we'd run out there. My wife or kids would call the police if they needed to. We had a neighbor down the road who was part of the volunteer fire department, and it was like a well-oiled machine because we had gone through it so many times. And so, yeah, I don't need to plan for all of this other stuff that may not happen, but we became proficient with handling that situation because we were exposed to it so often.
That's crazy. I had a similar circumstance when I was in college, and it was at Wyotech, which is like the community college leading into universities in North Carolina. And same deal. Like, it happened so often at this one main intersection that I pre-poed a bag, and then it became a battle drill. Right? You heard the accident. My significant other at the time knew to call 911. She knew I was going to grab the bag and go to see if I could first respond and help, because I was on the scene within seconds. First responders were taking minutes, and that's kind of how we look at our lives. The unfortunate thing is, a lot of people, because they don't experience the worst case scenario, or they're going through denial, or they're using their ego and arrogance. When you look at statistical probabilities and all the things, even in the stats, tell you there's a likelihood of danger, a lot of people just ignore it. So you
Mm-hmm.
look at motor vehicle accidents, more kids are killed than any population because kids are on their phones. I mean, the average teenager now, according to just recent data, is spending 2.5 to 3.5 hours a day on social media. That is insane. So
Yeah.
when are they doing that? Well, they're doing it as 16-year-olds while driving, because a heavy part of that population is getting killed. So make it a rule of thumb. Like, honey, as an SOP, you're my daughter. I love you. You will put your cell phone in the center console before you drive. You will not turn
Mm-hmm.
on that car. You will not drive without 100% focus. These little incremental changes, even though we are not exposed to them, could save your life. So think about what are the things killing people the most? What are the most dangers in my area based on where I live, and then start adapting to that.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting thing is that when you train for certain scenarios, it's applicable in other scenarios. So, like the one that this last accident that actually caught me really off guard here in Maine is the lady got out and she was pissed. I mean, she was livid and she was ready to throw down. Like there's a lady that T-boned her. She was from Canada, and you could tell she was pretty distraught. I mean, she hit her for sure, but this lady got out ready to fight. So I had to keep her restrained and keep her back
Oh,
from
well.
fighting this other woman. And I had no idea, but I think the ability to be calm because of just some minor background in jujitsu, like being aware of that sort of confrontation or physicality of it, like that translated into that situation that I didn't specifically plan for, but I was ready because we're looking at it from a broad perspective and how you might be able to serve and save people.
Yeah, that's a good point. That we talk about that in resilience and exposure, but exposure is conditioned stress, right? So you're going through some kind of stress response based on the control of whether it's low grade or high grade stress. So high grade catastrophe, disaster; low grade, like everyday problems, things that you roll into. The more conditioned you are for those things, the better you become at reacting. But there's a baseline, right? And often our baseline, our first world problem baseline, like you'll see guys going into fight or flight, banging their head off steering wheels because they're sitting in traffic. Just like this
Mm-hmm.
this gal gets
Yeah.
T-boned. Her natural response is to react angrily, likely in a sympathetic nervous response. And so our baseline is slightly skewed, but the more controlled, more conditioned you are, generally speaking, the more likely you are to succeed in a lot of these events, at least if you know what the right answer is. And so, like personal security, we teach personal defense. When people say, "Hey, Mike, I want to get into self defense training," can I come to a range and train with you? I like to do gunfighter, pistol, or whatever. I'm like, dude, don't do that. Technically, shooting holes into paper with a bullet on a flat range is easy. That's the technical component.
Right.
Personal security, we do real live role players and simulations, but we talk about decision point. We talk about stress and its effect on you. We talk about triggers and trauma and how that might affect your baseline decision making. And we talk about the shoot and then post shoot, all the legalities. Those are the complexities that really change things up. And when people are put in those situations, they typically fail. Even the best of them, even the gunfighter with all the multicam, they make a mistake. And then after that, they realize like, oh, well, that's not how I thought it was going to work. And then when they go back and do it again, dude, they're like a 10x because they were exposed to that condition. They realize what they did wrong and they go back into it, and they'll never likely make that mistake again. And I think that's the key is we have to be willing to confront our vulnerabilities, make mistakes, and then repair that and become better and better and better. And that's resilience. I think that's the literal definition of what resilience is.
It is interesting though with that type of training. I was fortunate enough to go train a little bit with Operation Black Site. Bedros Keuilian, Dan Fleischman, and Tim Kennedy was there, and we did some house clearing exercises. And Tim was teaching that instruction. And it is interesting because I know the importance of it. It's good to know. I may never use that, but it's still good information to know and good to know how to do it. But even knowing that, I still felt like I didn't want to look stupid, right? Like I noticed myself being hesitant because I didn't want to look stupid to Tim or to other people that were watching. And I think that mentality hinders a lot of guys because of our arrogance and ego. It hinders our growth because we're not going to put ourselves in environments where we look dumb.
Yeah, dude, that's the tough. I mean, you specialize this with your podcast and the things that you talk about, but the idea of men exposing themselves to vulnerability is not ingrained in our culture. It's certainly ingrained in military culture. It's certainly ingrained in certain institutions. Certain tribes of people have that. I mean, I grew up. Let me give you an example. Like, as a special operations guy, I was constantly told I wasn't good enough because you needed to be better. So AARs are brutal in special operations. But before that, I'm half Korean. My mom's a tiger mom. So I grew up where my mom was like, you have something in your teeth. You got a booger in your nose. You're getting fat. You're not good enough. And that kind of culture belonging to that actually made me more resilient than I think most of the guys. And I think that's what's missing in our society for men. And when we look at where men are on the spectrum right now as compared to 20, 30 years ago, a lot of that is because we've become so sensitive to the fact. And a lot of us are emotionally driven, mostly by algorithms that are derived in social media or technology. So it's like we don't have tools to get through conflict resolution and to resolve our problems in a better way. I mean, we do it in the worst of ways. So I think one of the issues that we're facing is complacency is certainly driven by ego and arrogance. We talk about it in the book, ego and arrogance being the downfalls. But it's not just the lady who thinks it will never happen to me. It certainly is the guy who's like, well, I don't need to worry about that stupid stuff. I know what my focus needs to be. And it's typically the EDC inside the waistband, the jujitsu or whatever. I've had jujitsu black belts in my class make really bad mistakes in one-on-one personal security simulation or scenario-based training. And that's because they haven't been exposed to that. Now, if they're on the mats doing a specific thing, they're set up for success.
They can rack up those points, right?
Yeah, 100%. All of those things include many variables of human behavior, and human behavior is insane. And there are a lot of variables. We just need to pay attention to them. And I hope people listening to this, men listening to this, are like, this dude doesn't sound crazy. Like, maybe I should just give it a shot or listen or whatever. I personally don't care if people do or not. I want them because I want them to weigh on the side of being prepared versus not. But that's a individual and very personal journey that I hope guys especially can get through.
Well, one trap I've seen, and I've fallen into this, but I saw this a lot in my financial planning practice. At this point, almost a decade ago, I would meet with prospective clients and we would look at their plan, their current plan, if they had one, assuming they had one. And I'd look at it and I said, this is a great plan if everything goes right. Like this plan will work flawlessly. You guys will be able to retire when you want. You'll be able to travel the world and help your kids and your grandkids. You'll be able to do everything if everything goes right. But if we throw one little variable into this equation, this whole thing blows up. And I think that's what we do in these types of situations. We think that, oh, well, an intruder is going to come at this time and do it this way and come through this door. And this is how he's going to behave. And you just said it. People and nature are insane. And you
Yeah.
cannot plan based on this perfectly executed scenario that might not actually happen that way.
Yeah, I was just talking to Marcus Luttrell, and we were talking about Operation Red Wing. I was in third group at the time when that whole thing went down. My company, to a couple of detachments of my company actually rescued Marcus Luttrell. And when I think about that situation and how that changed my life, a lot of the planning, a lot of the things that I did as a senior leader in the military were based on that experience of not just having a plan, but have the contingency for the plan and all the service support enablers in place to support that plan. So we call this contingency-based planning. We're not planning for mission success. We're not planning for everything to go right. We're planning for everything to go wrong. And in that, we have a contingency or a backup to the backup to the backup. And I think that's important. A lot of people, because they live their best life and everything's going right, forget that the whole point of this, a manual for surviving worst case scenarios, this title of the book, we are talking about the worst day of your life. And I'm not talking about zombie apocalypse. I'm talking about a motor vehicle accident where you're flipped upside down in a ditch and you're bleeding out of your femoral artery, and you didn't think it was a big deal because it would never happen to you. And now the difference between life and death is a $29 piece of equipment and about 5 minutes of training. It's like, we just need to pay attention. And I think when we plan and we look at contingencies and all the things that we want to affect, plan for things to go wrong, and then be prepared for things to happen that way. And when you do, you're expecting it. You have a new framework for expectations, and you're like, yeah, no big deal. I could flex really fast. Because like I said in the beginning of the podcast, adaptability is the number one characteristic of people who live versus people who die in catastrophe.
At what point does it become paranoia though? Because I've had close people in my life where they've gone mental, that like with the food prep stuff, I had somebody in my life who got so far down the prepping rabbit hole that they lost their job and they alienated and ended up eventually losing their family because they were so consumed by this paranoia, and they couldn't see everything else around them and all of their other responsibilities and obligations. I know that's extreme, but there is a point where I think there's a law of diminishing return on some of this activity.
No, I think that question in itself is so important to talk about in this whole concept and idea of preparedness, because that is the fear why most people don't get involved, because they think of that worst case scenario being a person who's paranoid, who has anxiousness, who has destroyed their life. They're living in a mobile home off grid in Baghdad, Arizona,
right,
with a tinfoil hat, And
this one was a Connex buried in the ground.
Yeah, and that's even worse. I tell people, like, the worst idea ever is to bury yourself in the ground, because that could literally kill you with a garden hose. I mean, I literally could
good
just
point.
ground
You just
you
buried your own. You just dug your own
grave.
Grave site. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
100%. I think when you look at what preparedness is, one, it's a lifestyle. So again, I'm looking at ways that I can improve my position, my situation. We call it upgrading your fire base. Like, always look for ways to upgrade your fire base. But also, preparedness should breed confidence in your overall capability, because you have all this capacity, you have all this space, whether it's in your person, your vehicle, your home. It could be figuratively speaking. And then you're building capability within that capacity for space. And what we tell people, like, one of the reasons we market through overlanding and hunting is because they're recreational activities. So if you prepare for the off-grid overland trip with your family, I mean, I overland, I do big trips with my family. We get off-grid, away from people, typically far from institutions and infrastructure, and that's on purpose. But if we're prepared for that, because it's something we love and enjoy to do, you are technically preparing for the worst case scenario. Because if you have to bug out, displace, go from bad to good, you're doing all the things right. So same thing with food and water and all the things at home. I have an entire basement room full of food, water, and all the things. Except I'm not storing MREs for the zombie apocalypse because MREs suck. They're really bad for you as well. If you don't want to poop for a week, eat an MRE. But what I do is I use it as like a grocery, like a substation. So I go downstairs with a box. I load all my groceries in. When I go grocery shopping, I shop to resupply the back end of it. Again, making it fun, enjoyable, and a part of my life that is actually going to benefit us, my family. I don't want people to go out there and go, hey, what's the best way to make this extreme as possible to alienate my friends and to make sure my family thinks I'm crazy? That's not what we're trying to accomplish. If most of the things that we teach you could do through recreation to improve your life, and that's going to benefit your level of preparedness. If it's not, I would say if it's not comfortable, if it's not something you can integrate comfortably, it's not going to be realistic, and you will potentially alienate people around you. So that's why we have to make it kind of enjoyable.
Yeah, I like that. I was thinking about it when we moved back. I didn't have any of my camping gear or equipment, and my kids wanted to go camping. I'm like, cool, let's go camping. I looked, I'm like, I don't have anything, so let's go to Walmart and we'll get some stuff. And I spent about $500 on a tent and some sleeping bags, but also a water purifier, an alternative fuel source, fire starting kit. Like these are all basic things that you would need for camping. And also, to your point, these are things that you would need in a situation that you might find yourself in that it has more real world consequences than just going on an overnight camp out.
Yeah, that's what I love about. I mean, camping is the perfect way to map this for people. In fact, when people say, Mike, how can I get started? And I say, have you been camping? If the answer is no, go camping. Why? Because all the things that you do in being more self-reliant are things that will help you build your preparedness game. Because really, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, instead of tethering via the umbilical cord all of the things that you outsource to be more efficient in your life, security, education, medical, all those things, that's fine. But you have to realize, based on the situation we're in now geopolitically in our society, we have to understand that some of those institutions are going to fail, they're going to fragment, they're going to break. And when they do, if you think about insourcing some of these things, you're going to be squared away. Like in the beginning of this, we talked about hunting. Hunting is one of the first start points outside of camping, because if you hunt, the process is enjoyable, but you're literally taking your own protein that you harvested and putting it in your freezer. Why would that benefit you in preparedness? Well, you're not buying it from Walmart in a piece of styrofoam and plastic and pink gelatin that's bad for your family, or bad for your kids, or bad for you. So I think there's great start points in this that aren't uncomfortable and crazy, that start with camping, start with getting out in the outdoors to build self-reliance, because that's really all we're talking about.
I think about it like I think one of the first times I went camping, I was like, oh, I'll go camping. I need a sleeping bag, tent, this sort of thing. And I went, and one of the things I forgot was toilet paper.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, all of a sudden, it sucks. All of a sudden, you're introduced to something you wouldn't think twice about it at home. You're like, yeah, it's not a big deal. But you put yourself in a little minor inconvenience like camping. You're like, man. And I'll never forget toilet paper again. I always have a roll. Same thing with hunting. I'm like, I got to roll up this toilet paper and put it in my pocket when I go out hunting.
Yeah. I think the most incredibly uncomfortable part of getting outdoors and doing the camping or hunting is hygiene, because it's built into our routine and it makes us feel good. So when you tell somebody you can't bring your makeup and you can't shower and you're going to have to shit in a hole, that is very difficult for a lot of human beings to go, oh, yeah, I'm down for that. They're going to be like, really? And then they actually do it and they go, that wasn't so bad. And that whole thing they went through is adapting through adversity. And when they come out on the other end, that's why people become addicted to hunting or addicted to the outdoors and hiking, camping, because they go, I really enjoyed that type of living. Let me get back to that. It's because primarily and ancestrally, we came from that. So it's just giving us a glimpse of what we used to be. And it's important to connect with that world back and forth because that elevates your level of preparedness.
Yeah. I want to go back to something, and I mock this a little bit, but I want to go back to something you said. And you were talking about the EDC. And it's interesting because you'll see guys who do a quote unquote pocket dump. And I'm like,
Yeah.
bro, like, come on now. How big are your pockets? Like, you're not carrying all that shit around every day, all day. I know that's the case. I'd have to have a 40-pound ruck to be able to carry everything that you say is in your pockets. So, what is reasonable for an EDC, and what exactly is that? Does that mean you have a bag in your truck, or is that just on your person and that's what's considered your EDC?
Yeah, a good question because a lot of people don't understand what it is at all. They think it's just the inside the waistband pistol. So EDC, everyday carry, for me, for how we teach, is everything from head to toe, including your behavior. I mean, your posture is just as important as the pistol in your waistband because that is the first demeanor hit that people are going to get. And when surveyed, like the most violent offenders in the world that are in prison, when surveyed, said what they go after, generally speaking, is the person who's disorganized. So why is that? Well, that means you're disheveled, you're not organized, you look like you're not squared away. So that could be your clothing, that could be your posture, that could be how you're perceived. So be perceived squared away. When we break it down to like everyday carry and its specifics, again, statistical probability is important. Here's what I say about, because I've heard people say, you should never carry a pistol because the chances of you using a pistol is non-existent. That's actually not true because what we have to take into account for is policing each other. Responsible citizens and Samaritans in this country who have the skill sets should take care of each other in your own community. And so what we teach in Responsible Citizen is you're learning the skill sets, how to apply a tourniquet. You're not only carrying that for yourself, you're carrying it for whoever you come across that needs it. So that's an important discriminating factor because people talk about these things in ones and zeros, and there's some gray. When we talk about EDC pistol, it's important. I think it's important because security as a principle should always be on everybody's mind. Never carry without training, obviously. And when you break it down, it depends on your environment on how you're going to carry what you're carrying. What I tell people often as somebody who's a dad, I'm mostly thinking about the considerations for my kids versus myself. So when I carry first aid, I'm not carrying first aid for myself. It's not like self-aid, buddy aid, because my buddies, my kids, don't have the ability to carry. I mean, they can carry in backpacks, but they don't have the ability to treat themselves. So I carry a fanny pack, and any bag external or any capacity external is going to build a more robust capability as long as you're trained on the equipment. So you don't have to get crazy. You know, I carry a Philcraft fanny pack I designed that's kind of like low vis that's made specifically for sectioning first aid, including a bleeding control kit, a tourniquet, and then the pistol where it's out of sight, out of sound, but easily accessible. That's my baseline. I do carry a flashlight sometimes because I am often in bed before it's dark because I have kids. They need to be bathed, they need to be fed, bedtime stories, and we're hunkering down at night. Also, the probability of something bad happening, it's about 60% of bad stuff that happens around a pistol happen at night. So I don't carry it tethered to my gun. I carry it separate in utility. And I carry basic things depending on the environment. I will add the environmental factor supplement. So if I'm going camping or hiking, certainly I'm going to have a big lighter. I'm going to have a Mylar space blanket. I'm going to have extra things to add to my kit. I think the baseline is a pistol, everyday carry, inside the waistband, inside a fanny pack, inside your purse, and then carrying the tourniquet and stop the bleed kit. Those primary factors all have to do with what's on your person. When you talk about the extension of that, we get into mobility, but everything on your person you should pay attention to. Lastly, I do have a story in the book where I talk about a case officer buddy of mine telling me that, hey, man, you're always on the job. And when he told me this, we were overseas. I was a CIA contractor at the time. And he's like, hey, man, you're wearing flip-flops. I'm like, yeah, I'm like not on duty. He's like, you're always on duty. And when I say that, pay attention to your foot gear, pay attention to what you're wearing, I don't mean just don't wear flip-flops. I want you to wear flip-flops. I want you to think about where you're at and the situation and where you're at. If I go to Disney World with my kids and they're like running around the park and doing all the things, and I am far displaced from my vehicle, I am going to have the best running shoes on that I could ever have. Because if shit hits the fan, I'm picking them up and I'm running really fast, right? So being physically fit, cardiovascular fit, and having the right stuff in EDC is super important. Weigh those considerations as a conscious thought. Again, we don't have to be panicked and anxious about this. It's like I wake up and go, what am I doing today? Well, I'm hanging around the office. I'll be in and around my vehicle. All right, fanny pack it is. Flip flops, I'll be within 50 feet of my vehicle. Flip flops it is. Anything beyond that, I'm thinking about other things that are going on in my world in EDC.
Well, and most of us aren't in an infinite number of environments on a daily basis. We're in like five. There's 5 days maybe
Yes,
that you have. There's like a work day, there's a weekend day, there's a vacation day, there's a camp. There's really 5 days or whatever that we might have. So it's not really that intensive based on what you're saying.
absolutely. Good point, too.
You talk about posture. I had somebody tell me the other day, I was walking, we were somewhere out in public, and they're like, "You look mad." And I said, I'm not mad. They're like, why are you so stern right now? I said, because I don't want anybody to mess with me. And I don't want
Huh.
anybody to mess with you when we're here. And they're like, yeah, I think you got that covered. I don't think anybody's going to do that. I'm like, perfect. Job accomplished. Like my job is not to be out there and try to be nice and pleasant. And to you, yes. But to everybody else, I just don't want to be messed with. And I think the fact that you're talking about posture is often overlooked.
That's interesting because that a lot of that's not talked about, period, right? Telegraphing your intent through your body language is mainly how we communicate non-verbally anyway, right? With the world around us. We're not using hand and arm signals to tell people to not mess with us. I mean, you can,
Right.
but most of it is based on demeanor. And I think a lot of times, like who's not a victim? Me. You. We're not victims. You know why? Because nobody's going to mess with us because we have the posture and the behavior that's indicative of somebody who's capable. And bad guys exploit people who are at least perceived to be not capable. So if you're disheveled, disorganized, you're not capable, then that is something that you can control right out the gate. I mean, I've been criticized about shaking hands too firmly, looking people in the eyes, because that's how I was raised. That's how I interpersonally communicate. Again, we now live in a world that was very different than when we grew up, where the way that you telegraph or the way you perceive somebody's body language is very different than 10 years ago. But again, if I walk into a room and I peacock a little bit, it's because I'm doing that on purpose. And
Right.
behaviorally, that is an adaptation. If I go into an environment and I'm around Jocko and Andy Stumpf and we're peer to peer, my posture reduces because I don't want them to think that I'm trying to size them up. So I'll reduce my posture. I will be eye to eye and level to level. And that's a good thing. Like knowing how to control yourself in your environments, depending on where you go, and just being conscious and aware of it is like the first thing in EDC, I think.
Yeah. You said something that I think we need to be more aware of, and I don't know if this is a new development, but certainly there's been some high profile cases that we need to address. You talked about policing each other, and there was this scenario about 3 weeks ago where this homeless man, I can't remember the names offhand, but on the train was subdued by a former Marine, either a current or former Marine, I can't remember. And this guy, based on the limited information I have, seems like he did right by himself and the fellow passengers on that train, but now he's being charged with manslaughter. Is that something that is a new development? And how do we not only police ourselves and help where we need to, especially when we face these encounters, but do it in a way that keeps us out of trouble? Or should that be the secondary thought? I don't know. I'm just kind of curious what you think about this.
No, that's a very good question. Jordan Neely is the case.
Neely,
And
that's right.
yeah, and it was a tragic circumstance, both for Mr. Neely and this Marine that was put in that situation. But the reason it was so tragic is because this Michael Jackson impersonator, the guy that was tragically killed because he's essentially suffocated, according to the district attorney who got the report from his autopsy. he unfortunately suffocated because he was held in position for an extended period of time. And we know the difference because of jujitsu, the difference between a blood choke and an air choke, right? Air chokes, you're never coming back. Blood chokes, it's part of a choke process to decapacitate or incapacitate the person that you're fighting. And so when you look at Good Samaritan laws, there's a lot of states on the books right now that have laws that if you don't watch out for each other, you could be charged. You could literally be charged for ignoring somebody, like the state of Utah. If you, there's a Good Samaritan law. So if you intentionally bypass somebody who's in distress, who needs help, you can actually be charged. Now, it's limited in the amount of people and the amount of district attorneys around the country who would do that. But the culture right now is a culture of catching it on video. I mean, the incident was videotaped, right?
Right.
Where immediate action is to go to the phone instead of going to help. And you have good Americans, including this Marine. I believe he had good intent. And the failure is on the system, because this Michael Jackson impersonator was arrested 44 times prior, had a history of mental health issues, including violently assaulting people, including an elderly lady. I mean, he pushed a woman onto tracks, and he violently assaulted a senior citizen. So when we look at that situation in its totality, there's a balance. One of the issues I've had with the Marine is he likely didn't understand what he was doing at the time, whether it was stress. But again, we're politicizing this through the national media, where we're saying, hey, this is potentially a race issue, even though there's an Hispanic male and a black male that were trying to help him at the same time against somebody who was distraught, but definitely capable and willing at some point, because he did it before, of hurting people. So the balance is, we trusted the institutions as an outsource to help us, because that's why you pay taxpayer dollars to first responders who are supposed to do their job. Now you have the mayor and even the governor at some point
DAs
saying, we don't want you to do your job. And then the DAs prosecute the Good Samaritans who had no intent of doing any wrong, that are now charged with manslaughter, I think in the second degree for his particular case. That is a problem. It just happened in Texas, where a guy who was a military active service member shot and killed a protester that had an AK-47 when he dropped off one of his the guys in his Uber, because he was Uber part-timing.
That's right.
He dropped off a guy in the protest. They surrounded his vehicle. He perceived a threat. With stand your ground and castle doctrine, which exists on the books in Texas, that was a clear-cut case of self-defense. No matter the nuances that you hear characterizing him or the protester, he perceived a threat. The guy had a loaded AK-47. That, by all conditions, would be a clear-cut case of self-defense, but it's not.
He was charged. I think he was charged.
He was charged, and he went
Right.
to prison. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Now, the governor has since said he will, because the DA was appeared to be politicizing it and making it, he was radical. He's likely going to pardon this guy, but man, that's very scary. So what I say is, a general rule of thumb is, when you come across somebody who's in harm's way, you need to help them. And at the end of the day, based on your moral and ethical value system, do the right thing. Like that exact situation, I would have been in that exact situation, because I would have tried to do the right thing, except I know how to choke somebody, and I would have choked him out in 15, 30 seconds max if he was really, really resilient. And then put him to sleep and stepped aside and let them handle him, call 911, whatever the case is. But it just didn't turn out that way. It's scary for Good Samaritans and responsible citizens, but we need to police each other. I would weigh on police each other up and weigh on that side than I would not. It'd be like somebody asking me, should I join the military under this administration? Politics aside, it's always a good case in point to get good people in the military that are going to defend our country. So the answer is always yes, but there's difficulties in it right now.
Right. I think that echoes, I know one of your core tenets, which is to be trained, right? You said it. If you're going to carry a firearm, be trained. And I think the probability of you getting yourself into trouble with a firearm, for example, or shooting somebody, is significantly higher if you're not trained. If you're trained, you're going to be a little bit more discerning in how you hold that weapon, whether or not you take a shot, whether or not you even pull that weapon out. If you're trained, you might not even need to escalate to that level of violence. You were talking about it with a choke. If you do a choke properly, it's not going to kill a guy. It's just going to pass him out and incapacitate him. So I think that echoes what you're saying. Be trained. That's probably going to keep you more safe than anything else.
Yeah, it's the number one standard for anything. I mean, if you use a tool because you carry the tool, you need to train with the tool. And having trained last year, we trained 10,000 people. I trained thousands of people every single month with all my instructors who give good AARs, and we're constantly evolving protocols. And I will tell you, having seen the difference between technical training on flat ranges and training on force through decision making and stress, there's a big disparity there. A lot of guys don't know when to pull the trigger. They'll give you legal jargon. They'll say, well, I'll use the appropriate amount of force when necessary, when threat or bodily harm. I'm like, stop. I'm asking ethically, morally, and legally, when would you use deadly force? What do you mean? Like, would you shoot a guy holding a gun standing inside of your home? Yes. What if he was a 14-year-old kid? Well, what's the circumstances? That's the right question. Okay,
That's
let's
good.
go.
Yeah.
Let's evolve this a little bit, because it's not cut and dry. It's not black and white. There's not ones and zeros. There are a lot of variables that impact the situation. And if you don't know how you're going to act and operate under those conditions, then you're just training 1/100th of the problem, which is the technical part. And that's the easiest part.
Yeah. Are there other, you talked about this with just the I don't know, the moral decay of society. I would sum it up as, in your experience, are there other threats that we need to be aware of? Institutions failing, just I can't even think of what scenarios that might be, but I know you think about this on a daily basis about things we ought to be aware of culturally, societally, that put us in risk.
Yeah, like when you look at political division and the threat of political drama affecting you, 10 years ago, it didn't really affect you because it was so nuanced. It was so much operating in an echo chamber, and you just didn't care. Now, for the first time, I think a lot of this political division, a lot of the political decisions are affecting these institutions and culture and in such aggressive scale that it is affecting us for the first time on the ground at like the tactical level. The idea is like you're supposed to live your free life, like almost like I lived in the military where I served under Obama and everybody was scared scared to death of like Obama screwing it up. And it's like, well, if you just do the job and the job is still able to like, operate, then it's not affecting you. So you didn't worry about what was going on in politics. Now more than ever, I think we're seeing those differences, including in national defense and security via foreign policy or the lack of foreign policy and relationships, but most certainly in the supply chain in this country. That's what scares me the most about supply chain. When you look at the pandemic, when you look at all of the things that we're facing with China having its influence, Russia having its influence, all the elections, the mistrust of the government, the scariest thing I look at is the supply chain and how unstable and fragile it is. The fragility that exists in all the supply chains around our country, and the fact that we still need to gas our vehicles to get to the store, to get the food, and we're working with limited supplies where it just takes a couple of things to disrupt what we have going on, which could mean ultimately the survival of our species on this planet in America. It's scary. I mean, COVID-19 and a couple other things showed and demonstrated that there was definitely fragility in these cycles where you have people, beating each other up for paper towels. You have supply chains, toilet paper. You have truck drivers shutting down or protesting and it affecting supply chains across the country. You have railroad across the country breaking down in infrastructure and trains coming off the tracks, derailing. So always remember, government is ran by human beings in all these institutions. The whole idea is they're supposed to optimize and make our lives more efficient. And with more corruption in society, with more moral decay, like you stated, in our society, those things are definitely going to affect the institution. And they are. So culturally, they're being eaten up from the inside. And at the end of the day, you can't get the institutions to do their job. And so I say this often: you've outsourced all your reliance to an institution that is now failing and fracturing. It's time to take back some ownership and not depend on every single system, and take back some self-reliance in your life. And certainly in supply chain, I would weigh supply chain issues over security, but with supply chain issues comes a massive security threat, because people out the gate will be fighting for resources. Always remember that. It's like these things cascade, and when they do, based on the fall off from the tipping point, they're never coming back. They're going to roll downhill. They're going to collect steam and energy, and before you know it, all hell is broke loose.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a valuable point. The other one I've thought about is our monetary system. I thought about this with that truck driver protest in Canada about a year ago regarding COVID, where they're shutting off GoFundMe access. They're accessing bank accounts to shut off transactions in your own bank account. Like, we think our money's secure. Your money is zeros and ones for the most part, and it's accessible by financial institutions that are definitely corrupt, and also governments that tend to be corrupt as well. That's a real scary issue when all of a sudden you think you've got 100 grand in the bank and now you have nothing.
Yeah, this new budget proposal and going over the debt so we didn't default on our debt. The last time we did that was under Obama in 2011, and we had a lot of compromise. One of the things we compromised this time around, which just happened today, by the way, by the time this podcast comes out, like last week, it just happened.
Yep.
They cut $20 billion off the IRS budget. That means the IRS asked for $20 billion to execute its plans. What were the plans? Well, building infrastructure, building out officer operations and investigations, and going after people who haven't paid taxes on their Apple Pay. You know, like when we're going after Venmo and looking at people who made transactions of $600 or more because we need a tax collect, and we're turning law-abiding citizens who are selling shoes and novelty items out of their garage, and now we have to go after them, and we're investing Americans' tax-paying dollars to reinvest in investigating American citizens for some stupid reason that is not going to move the needle on anything. Like, we're okay with China, we're okay with the war in Ukraine, we're okay with all of these things, but now we're refocusing this on ourselves. That's not okay. That's when you know you got massive corruption. And this is speaking from experience, dude. When they called me a domestic terrorist, when they went down this road because I started American Contingency, they shut down my Shopify. I found out from the back end, the federal government contacted, basically put me on a blacklist, and every banking system, which included at the time my merchant service account through my bank at the time, got shut down. My assets were frozen. PayPal shut down my account. Assets are frozen. And then they shut down my Shopify and said, you got 48 hours to collect your website and all your user data before it gets shut down. We collected none of it. They destroyed my business. And in 72 hours, after me and my CMO stayed up all night fixing it, we had to stand up and go, hey guys, if you want to support us, we got hats, and we could do these hats through Venmo. If you want to buy a hat, sell it. And we sold like $20,000 worth of hats. But that was the only guarantee we had, because we had a market of good Americans willing to support us. Otherwise, all these players who play with no influence, who don't have a story to tell, don't have a voice to represent them, are getting shut down. And that is going to continue to be a problem. I can't even imagine what next year is going to look like, but it will be the nearest to the worst case scenario in our society, I think, in human history, at least my short history on this earth.
I think that also speaks to the importance of community, because you're able to go out to your community, and even if it's digital community, and say, hey guys, we need support, we need help. And then you have that. Too many men, I think, isolate themselves, lone wolf, think they can do it on their own. They call themselves alphas or omegas or whatever the Greek term is they use right now. And it's like, maybe you ought to build a community, digital and physical community, that can help you in situations like this.
That's the number one thing that we advocate for in all of this stuff. It all leads back to community. And, Yellowstone reintroduced wolves, and they had a wolf called Wolf 21. It's the name of my CBD company because of the story of resilience. But when Wolf 21 was reintroduced, he started a super PAC, and he was exiled from his original pack. When he started his super PAC, he consolidated all his pups in one den. At peak, he had 37 wolves in his pack. When they went out to hunt, they crushed everything. They had an abundance of resources, even in scarcity, because they had the power in community and numbers. Some scientists, some psychologists will tell you that number is between 120 and 150 people. But you have hundreds of thousands of friends on social media. Those aren't your friends. Your community and your friendship group are the people who are closest to you. And I think it's not talked about enough, but this lone wolf mentality will never work in execution. You will always fail because you need assets, you need people, you need strength in numbers, and you need a tribe. It's how we've always survived. It's why the Comanche Indian was the warring tribe, because they were always mobile. They were always moving in strength in numbers, and they were feeding off the buffalo, bison in the plains. And so they were the strongest. We have to get back to that. I mean, most of us don't know our neighbors. We don't know people in our apartment complex. When you look at preparedness, I hope it's like one of those things that, of all the things that divide us, it's like one of those things that could bring us closer together. Because I think, like, if you're a liberal in San Francisco and we sat down to break bread together, and you were talking about what's important to you, it was your family. It was living a thriving life with your family, and same as me. So maybe we can get past all this political divide, all this bullshit, and focus on what's most important: families and community, which is the most important part of this.
I love it, man. Well, we've got a lot more to talk about, and we definitely could. I want to let the guys know where they can obviously pick up a copy of your book, Prepared. I've got right here. I got an advanced copy, so sorry guys, I got it before you. But man, I appreciate the information in here and all the work that you've been doing. I was going to say over the past decade, but it's been decades that you've been doing this work. Tell the guys where to connect with you. Obviously, pick up a copy of the book, American Contingency, whatever you're doing. Let the guys know.
Yeah, mostly it's all just philcraftsurvival.com. We could kind of port you where you need to go. Look, I'll say this. This is not a sales pitch, because I don't care if you don't train or sustain your level of training with us. I don't care if you don't buy a product, a hat, a t-shirt. I just want you to have the idea that preparedness could be an important and valuable purpose in your life where many people are missing purpose. So our podcast, our YouTube channel, the Philcraft Survival channel are all free. I mean, you can just go there, digest as much information as you want, and start up Fieldcrest or Thrive. You want, like, start your own company. I want competition in this space because I think options are good. I think consumers want options. They want choices. There's not a lot of people doing preparedness. So if you think this is valuable information, just look into it at philcraftsurvival.com. We do have an app. There's a QR code on the back of the book. If you think this is valuable and you think you want to get started, everything from canning and jarring to personal defense to mobility and all the things that we teach are going to be on our application. And that application is a virtual learning tool to get your ass somewhere in person and actually interoperate and build relationships with real people in real life. So that's the goal. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your people on this podcast. And yeah, Philcraft Survival.
Yeah, man, you're doing good work. We'll sync everything up. I appreciate you. It's been good to get to know you over the past couple of years. You're doing good work, and more of us need to tap into what you're doing. So thanks for leading the charge.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate everybody who listens to this podcast, and thank you for having me.